Recently, I was invited as a guest speaker to speak at a 3-day conference about veganism. The people who invited me were polite and professional, but I declined. You see, although I was invited to speak about veganism, the topic that I was given was the impacts of excessive meat consumption in the urban setting. This is environmentalism. Now, I think that I have a sort of golden practical analogy about why animal liberation advocates should not speak from an environmentalist angle. And I also have a very fact-based analysis of why animal liberation advocates should not do this. And in this video, I'd like to share them with you. Now, before I go on and tell you why I think animal liberation advocates should not speak from an environmentalist perspective, I would like to provide a sort of throat clearing. A plant-based diet is absolutely far better for the environment than a diet consisting of animal products. References are linked in the description. Anyway, with that cleared up, let's begin. Now, before I give you that sort of golden practical analogy, let us talk about those specific conditions under which a vegan person, not a vegan diet, a vegan person has a lower environmental impact than a non-vegan. The condition is that the other factors should not vary to a huge extent. Other factors such as transportation, your housing, the amount of electricity you use, where that electricity comes from, how much electronics you buy per year, and so on. For example, the lifestyle of the average person in the United States of America is such that if everyone on earth lived like the average American, then we would need 5 Earths to keep up with that. That is the amount of resources we would need to keep up with the average American lifestyle. The only reason the environmental catastrophe is not absolutely out of control at this point is because there are countries in which the average lifestyle is such that we don't need even 1 Earth to sustain the average lifestyle in those countries. For example, by contrast, the lifestyle of the average Indian is such that if everyone on the planet lived like the average Indian, then we would need 0.7 Earths to keep up with that lifestyle, which is to say, if everyone lived like the average Indian, we would not even need all of the resources that the Earth can provide. So purely from an environmental perspective, the average Indian who is not vegan is not only doing much better than the average American, vegan or not. Speaking purely from an environmental perspective, the average Indian doesn't even have an obligation to go vegan because they're already doing enough. They're already not enjoying many of the facilities and pleasures that the average American is enjoying. So why should they also give up meat, dairy, and eggs? Now this, of course, is purely from an environmentalist perspective. By the way, in this context, Indian Americans, which is to say Indian by ethnicity living in America, are counted as Americans, not as Indians. Now, let me remind you about the population of India. Indians in India are about 1.3 billion people. If you start counting other countries that have a similar or a lower level of consumption as Indians in India, you're looking at billions more. Ask yourself this: are you fine with this many people, billions of people, literally billions of people consuming the flesh and eggs and milk of other animals? And this is why we need to focus on the animal liberation angle. You see, while emission of carbon dioxide and the use of water and the use of land, these things are only a problem when done in excess. But that is not the conclusion that we would reach if we take the animal liberation approach. From the animal liberation approach, every single time that an innocent individual is killed unnecessarily, that is a grave moral failing. And when we take this approach, it becomes incredibly clear that even if you're an incredibly sustainable person, killing is still immoral. Just because you're killing someone sustainably, it doesn't mean that the killing is justified. Oh, by the way, if you're enjoying this video, a sub to the channel and a like on this video would be sustainable. I also promised that I would give you a sort of golden practical analogy for why animal liberation advocates should not speak from an environmentalist perspective. But please remember that this is only in addition to the fact-based analysis that I just provided. This is not the main point. That was, okay? Anyway, here it is. You see, while there are many proposed cures to poverty, it is really difficult to find one that actually works. One of the only known cures to poverty is women's equality. I could go into great detail here, but basically the idea is that when almost half the population of the planet, womankind, have the liberty, have the social and legal liberty to join the workforce, to feel safe at their workplace and so on, the economic condition greatly improves. And that ultimately contributes a great deal to solving poverty. So women's equality would help all of womankind for sure. It would especially help lower class women, but it would also invariably help lower class men. But would you ever dream of making the case for women's equality on the basis of how beneficial it is to men or some subcategory of men? I would never dream of doing that. Like, is the suffering of lower class men an issue that needs to be resolved? Absolutely. Should that mean that that should become the focus of the women's rights movement and women's equality? Absolutely not. Is the environmental movement something worth advocating for? Absolutely. But does that mean that that should become a point of focus and the basis of the animal liberation movement? Absolutely not. I have one more analogy, which is more of a hypothetical one, but it might be like a closer analogy. You see, in previous centuries, European colonialism was very physical. Europeans would come to other parts of the world and colonize them. This is in contrast to today's neo-colonialism. Now, this coming to other countries, right? This was done primarily by ships, through legions of ships. The fuel of the European Industrial Revolution was the blood of colonized people. As you might know, the current environmental catastrophe that we currently face was started off due to those industrial revolutions in Europe. Now, I don't know about you, but if someone started to argue that the primary reason or even a significant reason about why European colonialism was this grave moral atrocity, this inexcusable moral failure, was because it ultimately led to the current environmental catastrophe, if someone tried to argue that, that would be weird, right? But that's exactly what we're doing with the animal liberation movement. Something to think about. Another thing that you should think about is supporting my channel by clicking this link. You receive exclusive benefits in return. This is the video YouTube thinks you like the best. This is my most recent video. What do you think of this? Let's discuss that in the comment section. I'll be in there for a while after publishing this video, and I'll see you there.